It started with a glint of silver on a quiet canyon ridge, a wild horse, impossibly large, standing still beneath the Colorado sun. She didn't run. She watched. And when two hikers dared to get close, what they discovered sparked a wildfire across the scientific world. Because hidden inside that Mustang wasn't just life. It was a secret nature had buried for 12,000 years. The wind moved like breath through the red canyons of Mesa Verde, kicking up dry sand in soft spirals across the high desert rock. Sagebrush and twisted juniper creaked in the stillness, the only sounds in a place untouched by most maps and ignored by all but the stubborn. Charlotte Hale stood still, her boots dusted in rust-colored grit, one hand adjusting the strap of her old Canon camera. She was 56, wiry and sun-browned, with eyes that could spot a hawk's twitch from 100 yards and a patience shaped by decades of wilderness waiting. Her salt and pepper braid rested between her shoulder blades, tucked neatly behind a faded green flannel shirt. Behind her, Tom Hale grunted as he navigated a ridge of uneven rock, one hand gripping a hiking pole, the other balancing a leather-filled notebook. "Looks like fresh tracks," he muttered, nodding toward faint impressions in the sand. "Too rounded for mule deer," Charlie replied, already raising her camera. "Pronghorn, maybe, or a young elk." Tom tilted his broad-brimmed hat back, squinting against the October sun. "Could be," he said, "but I'm betting it's bighorn." They were 5 miles deep into a restricted zone of the Mesa Verde Plateau, an area closed to casual tourists and open only by special research permit. Charlie was chasing one last photo series of desert wildlife for the autumn issue of Southwest Earth, while Tom had taken a volunteer geology contract with the Stone and Sky Conservation Trust. He missed the feeling of ancient rock under his fingers, missed the rhythm of canyons and silence. "You smell that?" Charlie asked suddenly, lowering her camera. Tom paused, sniffed the air. "Something's off." The wind had shifted. Carried with it was a strange scent, earthy, heavy, with the sharp tang of animal musk. Not decay, not predator, just unfamiliar. Charlie moved forward, crouching low, as she neared a natural bend in the rock, where the canyon floor dipped into a flat, sun-washed clearing bordered by high stone walls. She raised her camera again, froze. "Tom," she whispered, not taking her eye from the lens. "Tell me I'm not seeing things." Tom stepped beside her, following her line of sight. There, at the far edge of the clearing, stood a horse. No, not just a horse, a giant. The creature stood in stark silhouette against the golden morning light. A Mustang, judging by the compact frame and wild-carved musculature. But this one was immense, easily 18 hands, maybe more. Her coat shimmered with a dappled silver gray that caught the sun like polished metal. She wasn't grazing. She wasn't moving. She was simply watching them, head high, ears forward, perfectly still. Tom slowly lifted his binoculars. "Sweet Jesus." "What?" Charlie asked. "She's not branded. No halter, no fence scars. That's a wild horse." "Wild?" Charlie frowned. "Mustangs don't get that big." "They don't," Tom said, voice low. "But she is." Charlie began to take photos, wide shots, tight zooms, anything her hands could manage without shaking. Through her lens, she saw not just a big horse, but one that carried herself like something ancient. A matriarch. A relic. Something that didn't belong in this century. "She's pregnant," Charlie murmured, adjusting the zoom. Tom focused again. The mare's belly was swollen, clearly rounded, but there was something odd about the way it hung. Not centered, not even. The shape looked almost lopsided, as if something massive shifted within her. "Something's wrong," Tom muttered. "That's not a normal pregnancy." Charlie didn't answer. Her heart pounded louder than the wind in her ears. Her instincts told her this wasn't just rare, it was unprecedented. "She's not afraid of us," Charlie said. "She's choosing not to be," Tom replied. Then, without warning, the mare took a few careful steps to her left toward a shaded cluster of rocks where a thin trickle of water shimmered. She walked slow, deliberate, as if each step mattered, as if she were heavy with more than weight, like she was carrying history itself. Charlie lowered her camera. "We need to report this." Tom was already reaching for his sat phone. "Colorado Parks and Wildlife first, then CSU Vet Hospital, maybe both." "You think they'll believe us?" "If they don't," he said, "they can believe the pictures." He turned and looked at his wife. "But whatever this is, Charlie, it's bigger than us." Charlie nodded, swallowing hard. Her thumb hovered over the shutter, then pressed down once more. The mare turned her head, locking eyes with her from across the canyon. And in that brief moment, Charlotte Hale, who'd photographed jaguars in New Mexico and bald eagles in Idaho, felt the same shiver she'd felt the first time she stepped into untouched wild country. Not fear, not awe. Reverence. Something was coming. And this silver giant, standing in silence beneath the Colorado sky, was the first note in a song the world hadn't heard in thousands of years. Dr. Mason Briggs was 2/3 of the way through a lukewarm cup of diner coffee when his phone buzzed with a strange Colorado area code. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped outside into the dry heat of Grand Junction's mid-morning haze. "Mason Briggs," he answered, voice steady, already mentally calculating which client might have run into trouble with a rescue colt or found a rattlesnake in the hay. A woman's voice crackled through the line. "Hi, sorry to call out of the blue. My name's Charlotte Hale. I'm a wildlife photographer, and my husband and I are out in a remote section of Mesa Verde. We spotted a wild Mustang, and we think you might want to see it." Mason pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're calling about a Mustang? You know how many people think they've seen a Mustang that turns out to be a half-lame draft escapee?" "I get that," Charlotte replied calmly. "But I've photographed wild horses across Nevada, Wyoming, Utah. This one is different. She's massive, bigger than anything I've seen in 20 years. No brands, no fencing scars. She looks like a Mustang, only not." A pause, then a different voice, a man's this time. "Name's Tom Hale. I'm a former geologist, spent most of my life reading terrain. I don't get rattled easy. But this animal, she's something else. And she's pregnant." Mason's skeptical frown deepened. He'd been working with wild horses most of his career. Mustangs weren't exactly easy cases, but he knew enough to recognize when someone wasn't bluffing. "She's 18 hands at least," Tom continued, "maybe more. Proportions are perfect, but the belly, something's off." There was a long silence on Mason's end, broken only by the creak of a sign swaying overhead in the wind. He sighed. "You said you're in Mesa Verde?" "Off the main trails near Red Hollow," Tom replied. "Coordinates coming your way now." Mason didn't hesitate. "All right, I'm coming." Inside his truck, he flipped through his contacts and hit call on one marked Dr. Elise Tran, CSU Repro. The phone barely rang once. "Please tell me this isn't another mule with colic," Elise answered. "I think we've got something a hell of a lot weirder," Mason said. "Bring the portable ultrasound and pack for a 2-day stay." The drive was long, hot, and not even close to smooth. They ditched pavement within the first hour and followed a narrowing dirt path deep into the Red Rock backcountry. It took them nearly 5 hours to reach the last GPS marker, where Tom stood waving from a ridge, his wide-brimmed hat silhouetted against the sky. The mare was still there, still waiting. Elise gasped as they crested the hill and caught sight of her. "That's no draft horse," she whispered. Mason parked in a shaded wedge of stone, dust puffing up from the tires. He stepped out slowly, eyes glued to the creature standing below. She was grazing now, casually but with poise. Even from this distance, her body radiated strength, shoulders broad, neck thick but elegant, hips powerful. Her coat gleamed like wet granite, but what caught him most wasn't her size. It was the stillness in her eyes. She looked at them, not startled, not nervous, just watching. Majestic, Elise breathed. I was thinking the same word, Mason murmured. They approached on foot. Tom briefed them quickly on everything they'd seen, the lack of brands, the odd gait, the belly's size and shape. Charlie handed over the photos she'd taken. Crisp, detailed, impossible to ignore. Let's keep it calm, Mason said. We'll go slow. Elise knelt first, speaking softly as she prepared a mild sedative dart. The mare watched, unmoving. When the dart hit her flank, she flinched, but didn't bolt. Instead, she lowered her head, let out a breath, and stood her ground. She's not like other wild mares, Elise said. She's not like anything, Mason replied. Within minutes, they had her sedated enough for examination. Mason moved his hands across her flanks, pressing gently. No signs of trauma, no lesions, strong pulse. But the abdominal mass, Elise said, already prepping the portable ultrasound. They applied gel and pressed the probe into place. The black and white images flickered onto the screen. Mason leaned in, jaw tightening. There, Elise pointed. Heartbeat. Mason nodded. Yeah, I see it. And there. Another. Wait. She shifted the probe, swept to the left. Another one, she said slowly. And then, no way, Mason breathed. Wait, hold on, Elise muttered. She adjusted again and then sat frozen. Mason, I'm counting 4 distinct heartbeats. The canyon was silent except for the wind through the stone. Mason exhaled, stepped back, and stared at the screen like it had just betrayed him. Quadruplets? He said. That's not possible. I've delivered twins twice, Elise said, her voice trembling, and only once did they both survive. 4. It's unheard of, especially in the wild. Mason crouched beside the mare, placing a hand on her steady flank. You're a miracle, girl, he whispered. They worked into the early evening, running scans, collecting blood, documenting everything. By nightfall, they'd set up a small camp just far enough not to spook her, though she remained close by the natural spring like she'd lived there for years. Charlie sat beside a flickering lantern, reviewing her images. Tom scribbled terrain notes. Elise hunched over lab data, brow furrowed in disbelief. Mason stood on a nearby rock, staring at the stars overhead. We should name her, Charlie said softly. Tom looked up. You already have one in mind. Majesta, Charlie said. She deserves that. No one objected. And from the shadows, Majesta looked back at them. Calm, patient, and undeniably aware. Mason didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but as he turned back toward camp, he knew one thing with certainty. The world had just changed. And they were the only ones who knew it. The next morning broke golden and quiet. The desert sky above Mesa Verde stretched wide and endless, and the silence was so complete it felt like the canyon itself was holding its breath. Majesta stood near the natural spring, her silver-gray coat shimmering under the early sun. She hadn't strayed far from the shade since the night before. Her posture was alert but composed, her breathing steady, her eyes watchful, as if she understood that something important was happening and that these humans, with their strange equipment and careful hands, were part of it. Charlie watched her through the viewfinder of her camera, adjusting her lens as the wind picked up. Each frame she captured felt like proof that miracles still existed. She'd documented animals on 4 continents, but none had struck her like this one, not even close. I've never seen a horse behave like this, Charlie said softly, keeping her voice low so as not to startle Majesta. She knows we're here to help. She doesn't just know, Mason replied. She's cooperating. Mason had been up since before dawn, organizing the samples they'd taken. Blood, tissue, ultrasound footage. He was sending it all to the labs at CSU and flagged it urgent. Elise had rigged up a temporary shade canopy near the edge of the spring, just enough to keep their mobile equipment cool, and had begun logging vitals again. "She's stable," Elise said, finishing a fresh check. "No fever, pulse strong, no signs of pain, even with 4 foals." "Which still blows my mind," Mason muttered. "You sure you're reading those right?" Elise shot him a look. "I ran the scan twice. I can run it again." "I believe you," he said, holding up a hand. "I just don't believe nature." Tom sat nearby on a boulder, flipping through his field journal, but his gaze kept drifting back to the mare. "So what now?" he asked. "We just wait for her to go into labor?" "Basically," Mason said. "But we can't move her, not without risking the foals or her. That belly's massive. We'd be risking everything trying to transport her." "So we stay," Elise said. "We set up a field station here, monitor her around the clock." Tom nodded. "We'll stay too." Mason looked at him. "You don't have to." "We want to," Charlie cut in. "We were the first ones to see her. We're part of this now." And that was that. By noon, the team had settled into a rhythm. Elise checked Majesta every few hours, using the ultrasound to monitor the positions of the foals. Mason logged the findings, took more samples. Charlie documented everything through photos and video, while Tom hiked the surrounding terrain for vantage points and safety checks. Late that afternoon, a silver SUV kicked up dust as it rolled slowly toward the camp. A woman stepped out, tall and sharp-eyed, with a windbreaker that read, "Wildlands Watch, Field Correspondent, Sharon West." Charlie had called her the night before. Sharon was more than just a reporter. She was a friend, and one of the few people Charlie trusted to handle something this big with the right kind of reverence. Sharon removed her sunglasses and took one long look at Majesta. "My God," she whispered, "she's real." Charlie nodded. "Realer than anything I've ever seen." They spent the next hour bringing Sharon up to speed. By the time she finished reviewing the scans and watching the video footage, her hands trembled around her notepad. This isn't just a story," she said quietly. "This is the kind of thing that rewrites what people think is possible." "And she's going to give birth," Elise added. "Any day now." Sharon exhaled and closed her notebook. "Then I'll stay too." They built a makeshift shelter out of tarps and pinewood poles, just enough to shade them from the worst of the sun and give them cover if a storm rolled in. Tom reinforced a corral-shaped space with rocks and downed branches, not to trap Majesta, but to give her a protected area for the birth. "I don't think she'll run," Charlie said, watching Majesta calmly paw the earth. "She picked this spot for a reason." "Instinct," Mason agreed, "or something deeper." By dusk, the air shifted, the temperature dropped, the wind died. Majesta stopped eating. She moved slowly toward the flat space near the spring where they'd laid down fresh sand and soft grass. Then she turned her head just slightly toward Mason. "She's ready," he said. Elise scrambled to prepare her instruments. Sharon set up her camera, recording everything. Charlie dropped to one knee, hands shaking around her lens. Majesta lay down gently, carefully, as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. But the moment her body settled into the ground, her sides began to contract. "Here we go," Elise whispered. Mason crouched close, staying outside the perimeter, but ready. He'd delivered more than 100 foals in his life, but never like this. Never in the wild, never quadruplets. The first one came fast, a filly, light silver gray, with dapples already forming along her flank. She let out a faint cry as she hit the ground, kicking and squirming. Within minutes, she was blinking in the light. "She's perfect," Elise whispered, stunned. Majesta licked the foal gently, nuzzling her upright. 28 minutes later came the second. a colt dark as coal, with streaks of blue-gray in his mane. Then another filly. Then, after nearly an hour of tense silence, the fourth. A colt with a near metallic sheen to his coat, almost iridescent in the fading light. 4 foals, all breathing, all healthy, all perfect. The humans stood in stunned silence as Majesta rose shakily to her feet, turned toward her young, and did something none of them expected. She nickered softly, once for each of them, and they responded not with cries but with movement, as if they recognized her already. As if something ancient had already passed between them. Charlie lowered her camera. Her eyes were full. Mason ran a shaking hand through his hair. "This isn't just biology. This is a message," Elise finished. Tom knelt in the sand, eyes fixed on the 4 newborns. Sharon turned off her camera and whispered, "We need to protect them, all of them." Majesta stood in the moonlight, surrounded by her children. Calm, whole, she had given birth to the impossible. And the canyon had held its breath to watch. The canyon had never felt more alive. The air the next morning was crisp and charged with something invisible but palpable. It moved through the rocks like static, curled into the grass, hung over the camp in a hush that even the wind seemed hesitant to disturb. Majesta stood proudly beside her 4 newborn foals, each one nestled against her flank or stumbling clumsily under the pale blue sky. The scene felt like something ancient, a moment borrowed from another time, too perfect to belong to modern memory. Charlie crouched 50 feet away, camera in hand, but not shooting. For once, the storyteller didn't want to interrupt the story. The firstborn, Luna, nuzzled her mother's shoulder. She was the smallest but the most alert, her silver coat dappled in soft spirals, like sunlit smoke. Dustin, the dark colt with storm-colored eyes, tested his legs more than the others, bounding short, awkward hops before collapsing in a pile of limbs. Meadow and River, the 3rd and 4th, had gentler temperaments, watchful, curious, staying close to the shade of their mother's body. "I still don't believe it," Sharon said under her breath. "Not really." "They're all healthy," Elise confirmed for the 3rd time. She'd spent the early morning hours checking vitals, hydration, reflexes. No defects, no abnormalities. Their lungs are clear, bones sound, reflexes almost too good. "They're not just surviving," Mason added. "They're thriving." He stood a few paces behind Elise, arms crossed, eyes flicking from one foal to the next. Normally, newborn Mustangs were shaky, fragile things that needed time to adjust to the world. But these 4? They were standing, walking, even trotting short distances within hours of birth. "Majesta did all the work," he said quietly. Tom knelt beside a boulder, scribbling in his field journal, but his eyes were locked on the little family. If this were a painting, no one would believe it. Elise pulled out the ultrasound monitor again, half from instinct. "There's something else," she said. The positions they were in when she carried them, each one was spaced perfectly. No overlap, no pressure on the organs. It's like they arranged themselves. Mason's brow furrowed. "That's not possible." "Exactly," Elise said. They'd sent off new blood samples overnight, rushing them to Colorado State's veterinary genetics lab. The first results came back just before dawn. Charlie printed the report, holding the pages like something sacred. She handed them to Mason without a word. He scanned the data once, then again. "What is it?" Sharon asked. Mason looked up, slowly. "Majesta's DNA markers. They don't match any known Mustang registry. In fact," he paused, eyes scanning again, "some of these gene sequences, they haven't been observed in over 10,000 years." The canyon fell into silence. Elise whispered, "You're saying she's carrying extinct genetics?" "I'm saying," Mason replied, "she carries markers from the original North American equine line, the ones that died out at the end of the Ice Age. But I thought those horses went extinct before the Spanish brought horses back in the 1500s, Tom said. They did, Mason said, but somehow those genes survived, dormant, hidden. Charlie looked at Majesta, then back at the printout, and now they're awake. By late afternoon, the foals had begun to explore. They stuck close to their mother, but each showed unique tendencies. Luna led the way, her ears flicking with curiosity, sniffing brush and navigating rocks like she'd been born for it. Dustin challenged his siblings to play fights, rearing and kicking gently. Meadow followed her mother step for step, often glancing back toward the humans. River wandered farther than the others, circling the spring, pausing at times to simply watch the sky. "They're aware," Sharon said. "Not just smart, present." Dana Kessler, a paleogeneticist from the Smithsonian, arrived at dusk in a dust-streaked government SUV. She wore hiking boots, a windbreaker, and carried a heavy pack of instruments on her back. "I got here as fast as I could," she said, shaking Mason's hand. "You were right to call." Elise wasted no time. She handed over a full kit of samples: blood, saliva, hair from all four foals. Dana began running field tests under the shade tarp while Mason briefed her on what they'd seen. "I've studied fossil DNA from the Yukon and Alaska for years," Dana said, her voice tight with awe, "but never thought I'd see it active again. If this checks out, it'll rewrite everything." Mason nodded toward Majesta. "She's rewriting it already." That night they sat around a camp lantern, too restless to sleep. Majesta and the foals had settled beneath the crescent-shaped rock ledge, huddled like stars against the pale dust. Coyotes howled far in the distance, but none came close. Charlie scrolled through the day's images, then stopped at one. It showed Majesta, head turned, eyes sharp, with her four foals in perfect line beside her. Behind them the canyon stretched into darkness. But the way the light struck them, it felt staged by nature itself. "She knows she's being watched," Charlie said. "She doesn't care," Elise added. "She's not afraid." Tom rubbed his hands together by the fire. "This place, this canyon, it's like a cradle." "A cradle for what?" Sharon asked. "For something old," he said. "Something the earth forgot. Until now." Dana returned from her portable station just after midnight, her face pale with disbelief. "I ran the sequences 3 times, she said. "These aren't just Ice Age genes, they're functional. Not fragments, not fossils. These are fully active ancestral traits." The fire cracked softly. Wind rustled through the cottonwoods. "And the foals?" Mason asked. Dana nodded. "All 4 carry them, strong, stable." The camp went silent again. Charlie leaned back, staring at the stars overhead. "Do you think it's an accident?" "No," Elise answered without hesitation. "Neither do I," Mason said. "I think something triggered it. Something about this place." Tom looked out into the dark. Maybe this land kept a secret, and Majesta was the key. No one had a better explanation. They all turned toward the sleeping horses. The foals, even in rest, were breathing in perfect rhythm. 4 heartbeats. 4 pieces of a puzzle no one even knew existed. And deep in the earth, something old stirred something that had waited quietly for its time to return. The days that followed were unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. Scientists, photographers, or otherwise. By sunrise each morning, the canyon echoed softly with the rhythm of 4 sets of hooves moving through dust and stone. The foals, Luna, Dustin, Meadow, and River grew fast. Alarmingly fast, not just in size, but in instinct. They knew where to step, they knew where not to. And somehow, without being taught, they knew how to move as one. Dana Kessler set up her temporary workstation near a stand of juniper, using a converted solar box to power her sequencing tools. Every morning, she'd step away with new samples and return with new impossibilities. "This isn't just a throwback trait," she said on the fourth day. "It's a reactivated lineage." Mason leaned over her screen. "You're saying evolution hit rewind?" Dana shook her head. "Not rewind. Resume." Her fingers danced across the keyboard, enlarging sections of the genetic sequence. Modern Mustangs descend from Spanish stock. Their survivors tough, sure, but their genomes are fragmented, diluted. Majesta is different. She carries base sequences that haven't been seen in any equine species for over 12,000 years. Mason sat down slowly, folding his arms. "So, how did it reappear?" Dana looked up. "That's the part that keeps me awake." It was Hector Alvarez, a rugged field geologist from New Mexico, called in by Dana, who started finding physical clues. He arrived in dusty jeans and a flannel shirt, his field bag slung over one shoulder and a portable mineral scanner in his hand. "I've worked this plateau a dozen times," he said, squinting toward the horizon, "but this stretch near the spring, it's different." He crouched by the water source, digging into the soil with a hand pick. After half an hour, he waved everyone over. "See this?" He pointed. "This sediment band here, it's layered with rare earth elements. Cerium, lanthanum, traces of europium. And the water's showing elevated mineral saturation. Not toxic, just complex." Elias bent down beside him. "You think the environment triggered the genes?" Hector nodded. "It's not crazy. Certain minerals can affect gene expression, and we're not just talking about one mineral, we're talking about a cocktail. Combined with time," Dana added, stepping forward, "and maybe electromagnetic conditions." "You're suggesting the land woke her up," Sharon said from behind them, arms crossed. "Something like that," Hector replied. Charlie stood back from the group, hands on her camera, but not shooting. It's like nature left a lockbox buried for 10,000 years. And Majesta found the key. That evening the winds picked up. The foals huddled close to Majesta beneath the same crescent ledge where they had been born. Mason, Elise, and Dana sat by the campfire poring over data, while Charlie and Tom took watch duty. "What if the next generation carries this too?" Charlie asked, her eyes on the horizon. "You mean their offspring?" Tom replied. She nodded. "If the genes hold, this might not be a one-time anomaly." Tom ran a hand over his face. "Then we've got more than a miracle. We've got a shift." A howl echoed in the distance, far off, but clear. Not a threat, but a reminder that the world outside the canyon still existed, full of predators and people who wouldn't understand. The next morning brought a quiet breakthrough. River, the youngest colt, walked directly to a patch of jagged terrain that had injured one of the camera crew the day before. Instead of charging through, he stopped at the edge, tested a hoof on a loose rock, then stepped back. A few hours later, Luna led the other three to a shallow spring several yards from their usual water source one that Hector hadn't even mapped yet. "She's not guessing," Hector whispered, watching from a distance. "She knows where it is." Sharon filmed quietly, not daring to speak. "They're acting like they've done all this before," Elise murmured. Mason stared, his mind running wild. What if they have in some form? Dana stood beside him, holding the latest results. The epigenetic markers in their cells suggest more than activation. There's memory encoded in these sequences. Mason blinked. "You're telling me genes remember how to survive?" Dana nodded. "Yes, and these foals are proof." Later that day, a visitor from the Bureau of Land Management arrived, a stocky woman in Ranger green, her badge flashing in the canyon light. Sandra Mitchell had decades of experience managing wild horse populations across Nevada and Arizona. She didn't scare easy, and she didn't get excited often until she saw Majesta. "Holy hell," she said, stepping out of her truck. "I thought you people were exaggerating." "No, ma'am," Mason replied. "We haven't even scratched the surface." Sandra spent the afternoon reviewing the data, observing the herd and taking notes. By evening, she sat with the team beside the fire, arms crossed, staring into the flames. "We've got a problem," she said. Everyone looked up. "What kind?" Charlie asked. "Conservation kind, legal kind. If this gets out, if people start thinking there's a super Mustang out here, we'll have poachers, collectors, journalists, you name it." "She needs to be protected," Elise said firmly. "She and the land," Hector added. Sandra exhaled. "I'll do what I can to recommend this area for restricted study use, but we're going to need state support, maybe even federal." "We're not looking to put her in a zoo," Mason said. "She belongs here." Sandra looked across the fire toward Majesta, who stood under the stars with her foals pressed close. "She knows it, too," Sandra said. That night, the wind died down again, and the canyon returned to stillness. Charlie lay awake in her tent, camera by her side, eyes wide open. Images flickered behind her eyelids. 4 foals moving in unison, a silver mare who'd somehow become a bridge between the past and future, and a stretch of land so quiet it had forgotten how to speak, until now. Out in the dark, a soft nicker rose above the quiet, and 4 heartbeats answered. 6 months had passed since the birthing day. The red canyons of Mesa Verde had started to shift into their spring hues-lighter reds, softer golds, wildflowers blooming defiantly through cracks in the sandstone like nature's stubborn miracles. Charlie Hale stood beneath a cottonwood tree, a pair of binoculars hanging from her neck, her weathered journal open in one hand. The breeze played with strands of her silver-blonde hair as she scanned the distance for movement. The early morning sun was just beginning to brush the landscape with gold, and somewhere out there, among the wild ridges and forgotten draws, Majesta lived. Or at least that's what Charlie hoped. No radio collar, no tag, no satellite. They had let her go. The moment Majesta had regained full strength and her 4 foals could stand confidently on their own hooves, she had wandered off. It hadn't been a bolt or a frantic escape. It was quiet, deliberate, as if she knew where she belonged. And she took her young with her. At first, Elise had cried. Then she smiled. "She's not ours," she had whispered that day. "She never was." Now Charlie and Tom visited the canyon rim every 2 weeks, scanning, documenting, tracking hoofprints and watering sites. Mason, too, came when his schedule allowed. The area had become something of a sacred ground. Scientists, photographers, and conservationists referred to it as the cradle. No one called it that officially, of course, but everyone knew what you meant when you said it. Today, though, things were different. Charlie had spotted a herd. Not a large one, maybe 8 or 9 Mustangs in total, but enough to draw her breath short. And among them, trotting tall, flanked by 4 yearlings with proud strides and knowing eyes, was Majesta. "Oh, my God," Charlie murmured. She fumbled for the camera on her shoulder. Luna led the pack's left flank, her silver coat glinting under the sun. Meadow stuck close to her mother, alert and calculating. River darted around like wind in horseflesh, mischief in his gait, while Dustin brought up the rear, solid, strong, quiet. Just like his father, maybe, if there had ever been one. But the miracle wasn't just that they were alive. It was what they could do. 2 days earlier, a storm system had torn through Montezuma County. Tornado watches, rock falls, flash floods emergency crews scrambled to prepare. But as Mason would later note, the herd had already moved high above the valley basin before a single drop fell. Then there was the boulder fall last month, an entire ledge that gave way during a silent quake. Yet somehow the herd had not only avoided it, but had been seen guiding a smaller group of wild horses away just hours before. Majesta's 4 were teaching others. Charlie clicked her shutter again and again, but not for publication. Not this time. She just needed to remember. That night, under a blanket of stars and coyotes howling at a distance, The team gathered around a fire. Elise stirred her tin cup of coffee while Mason hunched over a topographical map marked with sightings. "They're not just surviving," Dana Kessler said quietly. The evolutionary biologist had flown in from D.C. for her third visit. "They're adapting, teaching, responding." "You sound like you're talking about a culture," Tom offered. Dana didn't blink. "I am." Mason looked up. "You're saying these horses have memory?" "I'm saying," Dana said, choosing her words, "they're passing information across generations, something deeper than instinct, something ancestral." Silence held the camp for a while. The fire crackled. The night pressed in. "You remember that ancient proverb?" Elise finally asked. "We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children." Charlie sipped her coffee. "Feels like these horses might have heard that, too." In the following weeks, the herd was spotted blending in with older wild groups. At first, stallions had challenged Majesta, snorting and stomping. But one by one they backed down. She didn't fight them. She just stood. And somehow they stepped aside. When spring peaked, biologists placed a passive DNA trap near the canyon's mineral stream. Just a small collection, pad not disruptive. What it revealed sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Majesta was pregnant again. But not just that. Her unborn foal carried the same dormant markers as her 4 previous offspring, ancient DNA sequences thought long extinct, now stabilized and freely expressing. "Transmission," Dana confirmed. "This isn't a one-time phenomenon. It's heritable. We're witnessing the rebirth of a lost lineage." The state responded fast. Papers were submitted, hearings convened. And after 3 months of rigorous peer review, the Colorado Wildlife Preservation Council did something unprecedented. They classified Majesta's herd as a genetic conservation priority unit, the first such designation for any equine population in North America. Even the president's science advisor requested a summary briefing. And yet, in all the headlines and debates, no one could capture what Charlie had seen that first morning. A horse, massive and still, staring through the light like it had waited centuries to be seen. At sunset, Charlie and Tom returned to the same overlook. The herd was gone now, dust rising far in the east. But the wind carried something behind, a single feather, white, caught in a juniper branch. Charlie plucked it gently and tucked it into her journal. Nature, she thought, didn't write stories for people. It told them. And if you were lucky enough to listen, you might just get to be part of one. A year had passed since Majesta first stepped from the veil of light on that rocky outcrop in Mesa Verde, a silent titan born of wind and something older than time. And now she had returned not to the human camp, not to the lens of Charlie's camera, but to the edges of the wilderness north of Dolores, where the forest met the canyon, like 2 old friends who never said goodbye. Charlie Hale stood at the rim of a new overlook trail cut gently through the sagebrush by conservationists who had designated this region as the Wildlands Genetic Sanctuary. A weathered sign stood nearby, freshly bolted to a post of reclaimed pine, Majesta Ridge, dedicated to the preservation of Mustang heritage. Under it, a quote from Charlie. "Some miracles don't come to be seen. They come to remind us we're still part of something sacred." Tom had one arm around her shoulder. His hand, stiff from old fractures, squeezed gently. "They're out there somewhere," he said quietly. "You can feel it." Charlie nodded. Her silver hair was loose in the wind. She didn't need a camera now. The images were all printed behind her eyes. Majesta, belly round with 4 lives. River learning to navigate fallen stone. Luna flicking her tail against the golden sun. And now, another life on the way. From a new DNA scan taken months earlier, collected from a tuft of tail hair caught in the brush, the lab confirmed Majesta was pregnant again, this time by a stallion from a known Mustang herd with no ancient markers. but the developing foal still carried the old code. What we're seeing, Dr. Dana Kessler had said during a panel with the Colorado Department of Wildlife, is not just inheritance, it's stability. These markers, once thought extinct, have found a host body strong enough to carry them forward. Nature has chosen to remember. The room had gone silent. Nature had chosen to remember. In the high pastures beyond the rim, beyond the reach of the trail, Majesta moved through the pines like smoke. She no longer wore the tension of captivity in her frame. She had given birth, fed her young, taught them not only where to drink or graze, but how to listen. To wind, to vibration, to patterns. They had learned not from books or labs, but from instinct braided with memory. Somehow, knowledge had outlived language. Luna, now nearly a yearling, was the swiftest. She ran like snowmelt, down ridge lines and back again. Dustin carried himself with the silent charge of a coming storm. Watchful, alert. Meadow, graceful and calm, often paused longer than the rest sensing. Perhaps more than she could yet understand. And river-curious, clever River had once led his siblings to an untouched spring, just days before a record drought struck the region. They're not special because of what they are, Mason Briggs had once said. They're special because of what they might become. Dr. Elise Tran, now leading a grant-funded study on instinctive behavior transmission in wild equines, had quietly refused interviews for months. When pressed, she simply said, "We were never in control. We were just allowed to help." That winter, snow fell heavy over the ridges. Pines sagged with the weight. Silence deepened like an ocean. And then one morning, just before sunrise, hikers from a small wilderness therapy group spotted movement through the frost. Not one, not two, but 5 horses, stepping single file along a ledge barely wide enough to hold a man's shadow. Majesta led them older, but no less proud. Behind her, Luna and River walked flank to flank. Then Meadow, then Dustin, guiding the rear with the calm steadiness of a true sentinel. But there was something else, a 6th figure, smaller, unsteady. A new foal, just hours old and yet walking, shivering but determined its coat, a strange blend of pale silver and storm gray, flecked at the nose with dark spots as if the world had painted it with leftover stars. The hiker took one photo, just one. It showed. Majesta paused in profile, her body arched protectively toward the new foal, while the sun rose behind them, casting gold through her mane, which lifted in the wind like silk. Within hours, the image had traveled halfway around the world, and yet the coordinates of that moment, the canyon, the trail, the glint in the foal's eye, remained known only to those who'd walked the path with reverence. Charlie received the photo from Sharon West, now editor of American Wild. She didn't publish it. She printed it on paper instead, framed it with rough barnwood, and placed it on the mantel above the stone fireplace in their cabin. There were no words beneath it. There didn't need to be. The world would keep spinning. But part of it now spun around a single truth. Some stories aren't told to change history. They exist to remind us that history, real, breathing, bone-deep history, never left. It waited. In silence. In hoofprints. In the breath between 2 heartbeats beneath a winter sun. If this story touched your heart or gave you goosebumps, just drop a simple 1 in the comments so we know you're still out there listening. And if you believe some animals are born not just to survive, but to remind us who we are, hit subscribe, because the next story might just be the one that finds you.